even as I like glimpse something that I know is true about love, it's still not all of it. For me, that feels really hopeful. Right now, I'm really kind of grappling with the grief and the sadness and the loss of that is embedded in love. It doesn't feel hopeless to kind of land there, because underneath all of that is a kaleidoscope, one glimpse of love. In a few months' time, in a few years' time, that kaleidoscope will have shifted and I will have learned something new about the texture of love.
It's Uncommon Good, the podcast where we chat to ordinary people doing uncommon good in service of our common humanity. I'm Pauly Reese. Fam, I am delighted to bring to you today Eréndira Jiménez Esquinca. Eréndira is the host and creator of the podcast I Don't Know and of the online learning platform Spirit School, a tool, a container that she is building where the work of decolonizing Christianity can happen. A quick content warning off the top: we do talk a lot about grief, loss, trauma, divorce, and Christian hegemony. So if these things are not right for you to listen to, feel free, switch this one off and we will catch you in the next one. We go on to talk about how Eréndira is redefining her relationship with Christianity, how she is listening to the body, how she is paying attention to grief, and following love wherever it leads, all in service of deepening the spiritual life. It was an incredible privilege and honor to get to chat to Eréndira on this one, to catch up a little bit since our times in divinity school. Please enjoy my chat to Eréndira Jiménez Esquinca.
I cannot explain how incredibly excited I am that you're here, Eréndira. Thanks for doing the show.
Thanks, Pauly. I'm excited.
So the question that I want to get started with, what sort of things are inspiring you right now that sort of lifts you up and brings you some joy at the moment?
That's a fun question. Well, I think on a very just basic level, I started taking tap dancing classes. So,
What?
yeah, I tap danced very briefly when I was a child for a musical that we did, and I loved it. And then when I was in New Orleans a few months ago, I was walking into this thrift store and I found a pair of shoes that fit me perfectly. And I was like, I think this is a sign. So it took me 2 months. I got into dance classes, and then on the first day of my class, the shoes broke. So I bought new shoes, but it was good. It was it got me in the door, and I've been going for a few weeks, and it's super silly, and I'm really bad, and also I'm not as bad as I think I am. So it's I'm in this class with, I think the next youngest person is probably in their late 40s, all the way up into, I think the oldest person's in their 70s. So it's fun. We're all just kind of learning some basic steps together. So that's lighting me up. And then
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's really fun.
So there are two things before you go on to the next thing. There are two things that I just want to grab. One, New Orleans, at least for me, best adult vacation weekend in the country.
Well, I got COVID on my second day there of a week-long trip. So that was not great. I was basically stuck in my hotel room for many days, but it was okay.
You got to know the decor of your hotel room very well.
Exactly.
It became a mini sort of an unanticipated monastic cell.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it. But I've been before, and it really is. New Orleans is fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then so the tap, you did it when in childhood, which I think is amazing. What musical was it?
Oh, Crazy for You.
That's a Gershwin musical, isn't it? I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep. I was a folly girl, is what we were called.
Do you remember anything from the experience of like doing the show and like,
Oh my gosh.
like childhood Eréndira, like being excited about tap and
Yeah.
the world of the Great American Music?
Yeah, I remember a lot about it. So it's taking me back. So I think there's like one scene that was so cool. So kind of to preface it, the teacher that ran the musical program, he was also really connected with the San Diego Comic Opera. So he was connected with like the local theater companies. So these were like not like half-assed productions. They were very elaborate. So there's this scene in Crazy for You. So it like starts off in New York, and there's like the director of the show, and he has all of his like folly girls, and we wore flapper dresses. And so I had this teal flapper dress that I was obsessed with. Teal flapper, tassels, amazing. And we would like all come out like flapping. Like the first scene is us like flapping onto the stage with our little tap shoes. And then the main character somehow like ends up somewhere in the Southwest. And so there's this like scene where we're like in a bar, and the cowboys or whatever are like playing jugs, and it's I don't know, it was so ridiculous. And then there's this like tap scene, so we're like tapping, and there's like the jug horns going, and I don't know who is doing the music, and then the tap scene ends where we like get up in a line, and we fall into each other. So we basically like domino into each other. And we like practiced this for weeks and weeks. And so we all learned how to fall so that our legs like kind of like slid out. And then the last person was one of the boys, and they like caught us. And so there's like 10 of us that just like all the way to the ground, 10 years old, super choreographed dance. I know. It was amazing.
Oh, that's
yeah.
that
I know.
That's amazing. Two, I 100% believe the art of like the fight choreography level precision that it takes to fall and not like fracture a hip even at like 12 or whenever.
It was so good. It was so good. Yeah. I think I would have loved to keep doing theater, but it was not something my parents wanted me to do long term. So I did do a couple of shows with the comic opera when I was like 10 to 12. I did a musical called Man on the Moon, and then we did Pirates of Penzance. That was like with like professional actors, and those are very, very cool for this little young person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, like being a male voiced person, a male bodied person that I am, like those sort of patter song roles are like one of the first things that you learn, like if you did like a bachelor's degree like in voice performance, which I did. So it's like, what fun.
Yeah, it was great. So anyway, now I'm back trying to tap, but some of that muscle memory is still there. So just when she's like shovel,
it's in you, it's in the body.
Yeah, exactly. It's fun.
I feel like fun is so important, like in the world that we live in, where there's a lot of things that are decidedly like that we need to endure that are decidedly less fun.
Definitely.
So yay, brilliant, amazing.
Yeah.
What else is in that like that list of that space of like inspiration and like hope and joy right now?
Yeah. So I would say two more things. So one of them is I study human design. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that system, but I've been kind of engaging learning. It's kind of a synthesis of astrology and I Ching and chakra centers, and it's a really beautiful way of, and some like physics and stuff as well. We talked about neutrinos. It's a really neat way of thinking about energetics and like the ways that we carry energy in our bodies and the ways that we move energy out into the world. And it's a system, and there's like logic that's a part of it, but also it's very abstract and very intuitive. So it's fun for me to kind of learn something in a very kind of like linear, rational, logical way. But then also there's a lot of space in the system to just kind of feel your way through it. So I study that, and I have a teacher. We meet once a month, and then I do my reading on the side, and that's just really exciting. I'm going to start offering readings and stuff hopefully soon, because I think it's a really helpful language in terms of expanding archetypes and expanding just like spiritual language that connects us to ourselves, but also the collective. And so I just think it's great. Yeah. And then lastly, I'm making my zines. So that's just always an adventure.
Do you have do you do like all of the print and like the production of like the physical work at home, or do you have like a print shop like locally? Like
No, so I do it all online, and then I send it off to a printer, and the printer prints it, and then I get the copies. But I do all of the formatting, obviously all of the writing, all of the design. Yeah.
Tell me about the most recent one. Like, is it a prose project, poetry, a mix of both?
So I did my first round of zines last year, and two of them were prose. One of them was more like abstract thoughts. This round, two of them are, prose. One's more of like an essay. One is, it's going to be long. I'm still trying to figure out how long it's going to be. And then I have one that's like more poetry and images. So the one that's poetry and images is kind of thinking about like time and space and location, and just kind of the ways that we like are shaped by land and transform as we like move through time and space. Those are more just like poems and more abstract thoughts. And then I have an essay on kind of the ethics of becoming, and like dwelling in belovedness, and exploring the connection between belovedness and becoming, and what does that mean for our relationships with others. And then the last one, the one that I'm still like editing a lot of writing for, is called Expanding Love. And so that's a little bit more of like my own personal explorations of non-monogamy, polyamory, relationship anarchy, intimacy, love, home, self, the divine, just light stuff.
Yeah, like bedtime reading.
Exactly.
Like bathroom reading. Like
right.
Yeah. It just sort of sits it sits in the place where the TV guide used to be, and you sort of
exactly
pick it up, read a paragraph or two, and put it right back down, and then
So, that's like the biggest project. The other two are pretty easy. I just need to do some light editing with them. But the Expanding Love is just writing that I did over the course of a year. And so I'm really trying to distill it into, I don't know what it's going to be distilled into. A story, but also imaginations, and also uncertainties and questions that still are there. So I think when you talk about love, there's not really a lot of, I think there's solid things that we can land on, and there's always still so much mystery. So it really, I think it like leaves a lot of the mystery hanging.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about that. Like, as we were getting ready, and like we were getting ready for the podcast, one of the things that you mentioned is just this question, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. Well, not that last part, but like that's such a good question, and I feel like it's not something that we ever just really ask that question unironically.
Right.
trying to piece that apart from all of the ways that we know it from having experienced what we think it is. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about sort of like what's kicking around up there, like in the noggin.
I think one of the reasons that love can feel so overwhelming or intimidating or scary, I know that for me, when I like come into relationships that feel like really loving, they also activate really old wounds and fears and stories that are not true necessarily, but are embedded deep enough that they feel true in the moment. And so I think to really encounter love is always an invitation to transformation. It's like, I just don't think that love is static. And so there's always an element of change that's involved in loving and being loved. And the more that I learn about change, like, it's just like there's always going to be feelings of like loss and grief that accompany that as well. I think there's just like no way to change without letting go. And when you let go, inevitably there's like a loss and that process of just like sadness of like, wow, maybe this served me really well at one point, but it's not anymore. And that means I'm going to have to like let go of certain relationship dynamics or certain like ideas about myself or certain patterns that like kept me safe, but actually were not really keeping me safe. And grieving the people that were a part of that formation, grieving, all sorts of things. And so I think the love part for me right now just feels a lot more about like vulnerability and transparency and learning how to allow myself to be seen and known in ways that are really terrifying, because it means that I won't stay the same.
So I think one of the things that I'm hearing is that to experience love in the way that you are describing is to experience change. And because change involves a sense of releasing loss, grief, to experience love is to participate in an experience of loss or maybe grief. Is that
I think that's definitely a part of it.
Property?
No. I think that's a big part of it. I think for me, that's like one of the reasons why I sometimes find love really like difficult to stay in, is because even as there's like all of these like highs and joys and like light and beautiful moments, like even as I'm moving through like that beauty, there's also this like inevitable this like I am going to change through that love. And as I change through that love, and as you change through that love, like we're both like whoever I'm relating to, whether that's a parent, whether that's a sibling, whether that's a lover, whether that's a friend, whether that's myself, like as I am engaging in this like dynamic of exchange, we're not ever going to be in the same, like we're never going to be the same people again in this moment. And that is both like beautiful and like devastating. To know that like this moment that we're glimpsing is like asking for our becoming. I don't know if that makes sense, but I try not to dwell on the sadness too much, but I think it's always there for me. But I don't think that like grief or sadness is like a bad thing or something that is meant to be avoided or escaped.
That I think is is, at least for me, one, it resonates for me personally, like thinking about like my experience of love and loss and grief by definition. It seems like so much easier to carry if that's like built into love by design, rather than necessarily being something that is an unfortunate like consequence of love, I guess.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And I don't even know if they're different. Yeah.
No, I think you're naming something that I don't quite have the words for yet, and I think I'm still in this process of excavating and discovering. But I think that if there is room for grief and sadness in love, then it actually opens us up to loving in like deeper and more vulnerable ways.
Everything old is new again, and consequently, I suppose everything new is old again. But it feels like such timeless wisdom, but it also feels so new at the same time.
Yeah.
There's so much of yourself, of who you are, that changes because of the experience of love and the loss and grief that are attached.
Right.
And also the beauty. Like two sides of the same coin, perhaps. Is there anything that you notice that feels like through all of that love and all of that change feels largely the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that feel the same are this like sense of unknowing and mystery and kind of expansiveness, that there's just like so much room to like discover, that even as I say these things about love, that there is like continue to be like more intricacies, more things that I just don't know that like remain to be encountered. So even as I like glimpse something that I know is true about love, it's still not all of it. And I think for me, that feels really hopeful that, you know, even as I right now, I'm really kind of grappling with the grief and the sadness and the loss of that is embedded in love. That doesn't feel hopeless to me to kind of land there, because underneath all of that is that it's just like a kaleidoscope, right? Like it's just this like one glimpse of love, and hopefully in a few months' time, in a few years' time, that kaleidoscope will have shifted and I will have learned something new about the texture of love. And so that's this continual like learning that we all get to do. And so I'm glimpsing something right now that feels really hard and heartbreaking and beautiful in this like kind of melancholy sort of a way. And like, it doesn't stop there. Like, again, because I'm changing, You're changing, love is changing. And so with another shift, I will kind of learn about another aspect of love. I guess I'm basically just saying that like love feels fractal, and that is true always.
Thinking about like the toy kaleidoscope from childhood and how beautiful that was, and that the beauty is that it was always different, even though all of the components were exactly the same.
Right.
And it would be much less interesting if it were always the same picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So walk me through the journey that gets you to today. Because I know you from the time that we were together as students at Yale, specifically Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. But tell me like, how does Eréndira Jiménez from like however many years ago,
waiting in this moment, talking about love in this way?
Yeah. What's the journey like?
I think it goes back to my great grandmother, and yeah. So I guess I will share that the zine is not a one-off. It's a piece of the work that I do through my business called Spirit School, and so it is, and Spirit School is what I like to call a decolonial learning and support container. And so it is a space for, kind of unraveling the stories, the practices, the communities that support our connection to the divine and to ourselves. And so, I think in the context of Spirit School, that's decolonizing church and decolonizing spirituality, and kind of working to unravel ourselves and our stories from the lineages and systems of oppression, colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, that are just like deeply embedded in us. And so that's where the zine comes from. It comes from the work that I do in that context. And so that work starts with my great-grandmother, because my great-grandmother is Soque. She is from Chiapas, Mexico. She's indigenous, and she was not born Christian. She also was illiterate for her life. And she was kind of, I don't know, growing up in Mexico. That was, if people don't know the history, Chiapas is the most indigenous populated state in Mexico. So there was a big push to kind of bring literacy and to like colonize again these communities in the late 1800s and early 1900s in Mexico. And so my great-grandmother was converted to Catholicism from the Catholic, and that kind of started this journey for my family in terms of like needing to find a way to relate to systems of oppression, systems of power, and learning how to like fit and make that work. My work is deeply related both to religion, spirituality, and also education. So I tell the story that my great-grandmother was illiterate because my grandmother, this is all on my maternal side, my grandmother was one of the first school teachers in the state of Chiapas. And so she became a teacher, I think, in her late teens, early 20s. And it's actually really funny to walk through Tuxtla, the city that she lives in with her, because everyone calls her Profe. Profesora.
She's a celebrity.
And she taught a lot of people in this city. And then my grandmother ended up meeting some Protestant missionaries. And so my grandmother converted from Roman Catholicism to becoming Presbyterian. And so there's this like move within my family of kind of assimilating both through religion and education. So then when we get to my parents' generation, my mom and my uncles, there is a lot of like professionalism. So I have like one uncle that's a doctor, one uncle that's a lawyer, one uncle that's an architect. And my mom was trained as a chemist and like now's a nurse, and they all did higher education. And for them, like religion is, I think, a part of their life, and is also like deeply complicated in a lot of other ways. But for my mother, that kind of moved her and my father from Mexico to the United States. They moved for my dad's PhD program. They landed in Salt Lake City, and they joined the Church of the Nazarene, which is like Wesleyan and a little bit evangelical, and in parts of the country more fundamental. My story kind of is pulling at these threads of religion and spirituality and education. And so when we moved to San Diego, which is where I grew up, my dad got a teaching job at this Christian college here. And I was kind of embedded in this very white evangelical culture with the expectation that like I would really like excel in school and academics. And that that idea, like I always assumed that I would get a PhD. Like it was not really, wasn't really like a question in my mind. I don't have one. I don't plan on getting. I have 2 master's degrees, and that's enough. Um, but yeah, but the narrative in my life was that like higher education was really important, and so was having a really active and engaged spiritual life. That I think got complicated for me as a young person because of the ways that the concepts of God, the relationships of God to God, the ways that they were being handed to me just like didn't make sense. And so in my church, it was very like read your Bible and do your morning devotions. And I tried those things, but like that's just one, not my rhythm. And 2, I was like, well, I just feel like there's like more. And I think that like I just have questions. And also like I'm 15, I'm 16, I'm exploring relationships in school. I kind of want to go to some parties. I kind of want to drink. I don't think that makes me not a Christian. So what do I do with that? I had this like real sense of, I don't know, God existing outside of the stories that I was being handed, but also not having anyone to really bounce that off of. And so really wondering for a lot of my adolescence, like, am I a Christian? What do I believe? Like, is this all in my head? I like pray in certain ways. I like read my Bible in certain ways, but it doesn't like resonate with anyone. And so what does that mean for me? And I ended up at a small Christian school for college. And that was, as you know, like most Christian universities are, like very complicated with their legacies, but also the ways they build community. And so most of my friends when I was in school left the church. And I found my way into the theology department. So
I feel like every Christian college, mine included, shout out to Greenville College.
Yeah.
Like that they're really good at doing that, right? They're really good at presenting the unanswerable questions, right? And but then like the place and the support to be able to have like the conversation, the difficult conversation around them is somehow just either not there yet or needs to have, or is not like, I guess, seen as the purview of the school as something they need to provide, or is forbidden by like whatever policies of belief that they have to like create the community.
Yeah. And so we ended up having to build community in different ways, right? And and so that felt complicated too, because we, even as, you know, these late teens, early 20s, young adults, we're still pulling from conceptions of community that we grew up with. And so even as I think many of us were learning about like anti-capitalism for the first time and dumpster diving and, you know, like solidarity with the unhoused and but also just like not really knowing how to engage with the world in a real way, because we were just learning how to do that for the first time. And you know, most of my friends or many of my friends were coming out as queer, and like that really wasn't a space that my school was holding very well, still is not holding very well. And yeah, so there's, for me, was this real question of these parallel kind of tracks that were happening where my friends, where we'd grown up in very similar contexts, mind you, they were all mostly white, and I had not. And so I think there might have been some difference there. They're kind of like, there's a lot of hypocrisy in Christianity. I want out. And I was like, that's valid. And for me, I am starting to take these theology classes and starting to take some classes in spirituality and simultaneously working for a city program with low-income youth of color. And I'm surrounded by non-white people for the first time. And I'm like, well, actually, like, I think there's a place in this story for like the margins. And actually, like, the more I read about Christianity, the more I read about the mystics, the more I read about the monks, the more I read about folks that are like radically like subverting systems, like the more I think that there's like actually a place for me here. And I am really kind of curious about like what that means. And so, and why for some people it feels necessary to kind of believe and step out of a system or a story, and why for other people it feels like there's still potential within the system of the story to remain. That was, I think, a question I was holding in my early 20s. And so from there, I moved to Kentucky, and I was newly married. I got married when I was 22. And so me and my now ex-husband moved out there so I could do this master's program in spirituality, because that's what I was going to study. I was going to like figure out what is spirituality? What is this thing that connects us to each other and to God? And I don't know. I was
what is God?
It was not idealistic, I don't think. But there, you know, in hindsight, it was just like, wow, there was still like a lot of structure around something that over time has become more nebulous and vague. And so, and all of that was happening at the same time as I was finding my way into the Episcopal Church, and also doing social work and really having to grapple with, you know, my own body living in Kentucky, my own just, and then when I was doing social work, working with, you know, undocumented families, refugee families, Black families and foster families, and really coming into this place where I was like, wow, there's like places where I have power and privilege and places where I really don't. And so what does that mean? And I was totally alone in those wonderings. And a lot of unraveling happened for me in my early 20s, a lot of really like low points where I just like really couldn't feel God, but also still knew that the divine was there. And so there was just this like, my 20s were very beautiful and very messy. There was a lot of bumping up into people and communities and institutions and systems and learning. And the more that I did that, I think I started to settle, but I also started to settle into just kind of clarity of maybe the dissonance between like words and actions, of just like how easy it is to like say one thing and do another, or how easy it is to like want to be something, but then like not have the capacity, the strength, the vision to figure out how to like actually like live into a new reality. And so by the time I got to Connecticut, which is where we met, I was in a really kind of deep unraveling that was like years in the making. So now I'm at Yale Divinity School. I'm at Yale. This is kind of the culmination of my great grandmother's illiteracy. And now here I am at an Ivy, and I have, you know, in my family lineage moved from Roman Catholicism to Protestantism to evangelicalism, and now to this body that's like, this is all like white Christianity, and like none of it makes sense to me anymore. Like none of it makes sense with my body. Like none of it makes sense with my history. None of it makes sense with my stories. And I don't know what to do with this, because now I've found myself in an institution that is actually the epitome of like white colonialism. And like, how do I make sense of that? And that was 2016. The next 4 years were just I just felt pummeled over and over and over. One, because there is a divorce that was happening, and two, because I was having to rethink my ordination. But three, also, I think I was like really starting to see myself clearly and the work that I was being called to do, which was actually like no longer being embedded in an institution. And so then that totally reorients all of your relationships. It like really, it cost me a lot to step into something that I knew was like really true for me, which was work of accompanying folks that feel that kind of restlessness within systems. And folks that are also kind of holding that tension of, the stories that shaped me, formed me, and raised me are in many ways incompatible with, like the stories and systems and spiritualities that I like live, work, play, and pray it. And so, what do I do with that?
Yeah.
So that's my story.
So there's something that really struck me,
Isn't it?
and I suspect that this might dig a little bit deeper into the question of stories being held together, like two. I mean, we talk a lot. I remember one of the catchphrases of Yale in particular is like learning how to live in the tension. And like not lose yourself in the process. So one of the things that I heard you say, I think, if I want to make sure that I have it right, you talked about not being able to feel God, but still having a very clear sense of the divine. And I would really love to tease out the distinction there. What do you think it is that causes that difference between what God is and what the divine is for you?
Yeah. I think I grew up with this idea of I don't know, like that a relationship with God would somehow mean this like constant presence or this like physicality to God, maybe.
Embodiment.
Yeah.
Incarnation, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, good words. Good theology words. We weren't using those words. I don't know if we were using those words in my church growing up. But it was more just the like, God is your friend, like I grew up evangelical. So like the Father God, as you're praying, like Father God, and so like there was this sense of like personhood maybe to God. And I think I experienced maybe glimpses of that in my life, but that's never really been how I've experienced God. For me, like there's been something maybe more disembodied, more transcendent to my spirituality. And so that's, I think, why when I was a young person, I was like, I don't think I'm a Christian, because I am not experiencing God in these like material, like tangible ways that everybody around me is talking about. Like for me, there was just mystery. And it was not that it wasn't relational, but the relationship was not immediate is the word that's coming to me. It felt more like, yeah, I know that there is a God because I am making ice cream at home with fresh blueberries from the farmer's market and like lavender that I picked from the, like it was just like,
Oof,
there was
be
like
still my heart.
I know. There was like a step removed, maybe, if that makes sense. Like it felt like there was something between me and God, but that God was like still in this thing that was in between, but was not personified. And so that in many ways expanded how I experienced, I think back then I would have still called it God. And over time, just kind of settling into, I guess like the divinity in these like mundane moments and these like mundane experiences, not mundane in that they didn't like mean anything, but just that they were like, just like, I don't know. It's still, I still don't have words for it. Like, it still just feels very, ineffable in many ways.
Maybe that's the part of it that, I mean, at least from my experience of evangelicalism, that so much of what constitutes belief and being, and participating in belief is that there is a right belief. And that that there have to be specific relationships, perhaps, like centered in personhood and in human relationships that need to be there, need to be right, need to be related to, in order for that particular flavor of Christian spirituality to work.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was like, it never felt like those things were like wrong or bad. It just wasn't my experience. And so it felt really important. And it still feels really important for me to say, like, if your spirituality like requires other forms like that, I celebrate that, I think what I am always trying to get at is that similarly to this experience of love, like there's just so much more. And that as we continue to move through life and our engagement with both our humanity and with our divinity, and with those around us, both, human and non-human alike, land kin, that like our conceptions of like love and the divine are also always kind of expanding and shifting and changing. And I think for folks that, I think in my work that I do with Spirit School, I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. And one of the things that like comes up a lot is grief, is again, this like the loss of, loving and knowing in certain ways, right? That as you change, like that means that certain relationships can't actually like go with you. And that includes relationships to institutions, that includes relationships to organizations, that includes relationships to communities, and really orientations to your own identity. So, if you are like a faith leader and you're in part of a faith community that no longer is resonating, what does that mean for your identity? And that's like, that's also tied up in like your expanding conceptions of the divine and source and self.
Absolutely. There's so much there that I suspect we'll probably circle back to, but I want to pivot a little bit and get into Spirit School, because I first started hearing about the genesis of Spirit School from Instagram. And you had this magnificent thing that sort of led into that, that I thought just sort of showed the genesis of like your thinking. That was the sort of totem that kept you consistently sharing with the world through this specific format, your thinking. And that was that you would do outfit for like outfit of the day posts.
I did.
And it would be this like phenomenal post, like long, like floor to ceiling length mirror, and like there would just be like so much incredible life and vitality in the photo. And then you would get to like the couple hundred words or so that just always touches on like what you were working on.
Yeah.
And so I would love to know what the process is like from working it out in socials to getting to this place of I mean, a school with modules and curriculum development and, ironically, systems for learning.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, I will say that the systems I use are not, well, I love getting dressed. Um, I I have so much fun. I have so much fun getting dressed. It's one of my spiritual practices. It's one of the ways that I really encounter my own emotions. Um, I I think this like the playing with like textures and colors and shapes and prints um and at least when I think about dressing myself, like proportions and just kind of like thinking about like what is what is happening on the inside and how is that going to like how do I want to like present that out into the world? Knowing that there's like for me not a distinction between kind of the stories that I'm telling about myself and the stories that like I want to share with the world. And so it was funny. I don't even remember why I decided to start doing it. I think I just was oh, I do remember. I remember what happened. I started a new job. I started a new job in an institution that was pretty quickly starting to kind of zap me of my like life and energy. And so in a lot of ways, getting dressed was an act of resistance. It was a way for me to kind of subvert respectability politics and continue to choose to be myself in a system that did not expect my body to be in that space when it was conceived of. And so every day I would get dressed, and like as time went on, I would get dressed and I was very angry. I was very anxious. I was very depressed. I was just like all these like big emotions were really starting to like move through my body. And what I was putting on there was armor in a lot of ways. It was this like you don't own me. I own myself. And I stand in like my autonomy. I stand in my self-expression. I stand in like my trueness. And there were moments, especially like when a supervisor started following me on my Instagram. And then there was this tension of like, well, what do I keep sharing? Because I did feel like I didn't really hold back in those posts. I was pretty honest about the things that I was like processing and moving through, particularly related to that system and institution. And I was like, I cannot stop talking about it but the fear of like losing my job was actually always there. The fear of like, if I speak my truth, will that cost me like my stability? And so then there was this like moment of like, is my stability worth it if it's going to like cost me myself? Is like having the salary, is having the benefits, is having the pension, is having all of that like actually worth it if I have to compromise who I am and my integrity? And ultimately, like the answer was no for me. Like it was just like I cannot do that. It is actually destroying my mental health, my emotional health, my physical health, my spiritual health. Like it's not worth it. So then what do I do? And that really kind of opened up the space for me to start imagining like what would I do? If I could do whatever the hell I wanted in this world, what would it be? And it was really scary because I had no plan. I'd never started a business before, and I I literally had no idea what I was doing. And I ended up really, and I still am, and I, want to own this piece of my story that I have like a lot of support from my parents, financially and just like emotionally. And so in a lot of ways, I was able to take a risk because I had community around me that was just like willing to support a wild idea. I remember just telling my dad, like, Daddy, I don't know what I'm doing. And he's just like, that's okay. Like, that's why you do these things. Like, you don't know. You're not going to know for years, like it's probably going to take you a few years to like make any kind of money to kind of get clarity on like your direction. He's like, if this is the thing that you want to do, like, I'm going to support you doing it. And so that's a privilege that a lot of people don't have as they're like kind of embarking in these new things. Maybe from blood family, but I think there's always support and encouragement from chosen family and the people that know us and care about us and want to see us flourish. But it does require a certain amount of vulnerability to accept that kind of generosity and support. And so that's been a big learning for me. But anyway, all that to say that even as and Spirit School, honestly, even in 2 years has undergone so many iterations. I kind of like went in with an idea of like, okay, it's going to be this like online community and we're like going to gather. And a lot of what Spirit School has been me learning about what my strengths are and what I actually can offer. Not what I like wished I could offer, not what I hope to be able to offer, but what I actually have the capacity for like bringing into the world, which are actually very different things. And so there was a lot of having to kind of like renegotiate ideas of myself and shedding a lot of like shoulds and being really comfortable with like pivoting and kind of like taking a risk and quote unquote failing. And, there have been, and also I think for me in particular is like learning my own rhythm. And so I am not the kind of person that can work day in, day out. Like I need a lot of rest. And so really for that first year of Spirit School, like my body was just in like decompress mode. And so I was really kind of trying to build something from a place of ease, which meant that like there just wasn't a lot of push, and I had to like wait for the inspiration to come when it wanted to come. I had to wait for the energy to come when it wanted to come, and that was really scary at times because I was like, how am I going to make money if I am like listening to my body? Because my body doesn't want to do anything. And so in this like capitalist system, like that doesn't work. But I also was like, I really trust my body. And that's really around the time that I also discovered human design. Human design is a really body-centered system, even as it's like super logical. At its core is that like our body knows its strategy and it knows its authority. And so when we're kind of leaning into trusting those things, like the right movements will happen. And so now Spirit School is, I think, less of an actual community. It's a very dispersed community because I actually think the folks that I work with one-on-one are very connected. And I think there's still room for bringing some of that together down the road. But right now, Spirit School is more like a place for story sharing. And I think that's where I'm moving into this next year is my gift is gathering people. It's not in content creating, and it's not in, I don't know, like universalizing. It really is in these kind of like individual stories and being able to see the connections that are kind of happening in the collective. And I have this like incredible gift of being connected to really amazing people that are engaging in decolonial work in their own context and with their own people and in their own ways. And so I really want Spirit School to be a hub for that kind of like story holding, so that people can say, oh, well, like you want resources on X, Y, and Z. Well, like Spirit School is the place to go for that. And it's less of me needing to be the teacher and more of us like learning with and alongside one another. And that this isn't like a hierarchy, right? Like we don't have folks that are like no more are like the gurus. It's just like some of us are a couple of like steps further along, and all that means is that we have a little bit more story to share. But that doesn't mean that like our story is better or worse, like my story is better or worse than anybody else's. It just means that I've been on this like journey process that like will be for the rest of my life for a little bit longer than you have. And so I have a little bit more wisdom, but eventually you're going to be on your own journey and you're going to have your own wisdom. And so like, where is the container for that? And that's really what I want Spirit School to be.
I'm just hearing you talk about it, and there's echoes of Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed. There's echoes of Maslow, like just thinking about like theories of like education and like knowledge of self. There are so many, as you said, body-centric. Here's that word, that theological word, incarnational practices that advise the direction you are taking this work, compared to all of the other models of education and of knowing and ways of knowing that you could have chosen.
I mean, I don't think any of it was really conscious. I was a psychology major, so you're right. Like Maslow, all of those like psychological, Jung, like all of that's there. I think it's also kind of like it's shown up in different ways. And right now, I'm spending time thinking about archetypes in different ways. And so there's a lot of like Carl Jung that kind of gets pulled out from there, but also, yeah, I don't know. It's not conscious. And I think that's, I think for many of us, like being given permission to just like be able to intuit in your creation, that you don't have to like consciously like sift through every single thing you've learned, like really trusting that like the things that like were meant to land have landed. And so like when you go to create or build, you're pulling at things that are just like already like deeply a part of you. And so someone else might be able to trace that like you just did. But I don't sit down and think, oh, okay, I'm going to pull from Paulo Freire. Oh, okay, I'm going to pull from Maslow, you know, like, but it's there, but it's not because I am like trying to make those connections. But I think we're all so interconnected that it just ends up happening regardless. Like we build off of each other, and then we all also put our own individual spin on the gifts that other people have already put out into the world.
When you think about like the space of spirituality, which has been so central to the work that you've done, and spirituality expressed specifically in the context of perhaps a sense of structured religion, that you have so much experience with.
Sure.
Structures of religion, business, like there's that relationship too that I'm sure like we could spend hours talking about. But is there something that structured, organized religion can learn from the fluidity and the volatility of entrepreneurship, or at least is able to learn? I mean, will they choose to learn is probably a different question. But is there something that organized religion could learn?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Spirit School is intuitive creation, but it's not individual creation. It is deeply connected to kind of like spirit prodding and kind of spirit urging. And that requires having to posture myself differently in terms of time. That's one thing. I think in terms of certainty, that's another thing. in terms of production. I know there's more, but especially, okay, in terms of time, one, that I think time and production are actually really closely intertwined, but that we want things to happen quickly. And when you are building something from the ground up, there's no way of knowing how much time anything is going to take. I had vast plans for Spirit School that I was like, I will be able to do this in whatever, how many months time, how many days time, weeks time. And really, like, there are things that I thought about 2 years ago that I'm like, just now, 2 years in, starting to say, oh, okay, I can kind of see it. Like, I don't even see it. Like, I can just kind of see it. Like, I'm starting to kind of get an outline for this form of something. And so I think I've been a person in the past that's like, I need to know. Like, I need to, well, and I guess certainty is like a part of that, right? Like, I need to know now. Like, and I need to be sure. And I can't do something until it's like fully formed, fully concrete. And the only way that you come into any kind of certainty is like over time. But even over time, that sense of certainty is going to change. So like, you may have this idea of like production, like a product that is completely upended both through like time and like the knowing that accompanies that. So what does that mean for like structured religion? I mean, I think one of the things that I see is that a lot of people are wanting to move more towards this like fluidity in their spirituality. At the very least, like wanting to learn how to hold multiple stories at the same time, multiple systems at the same time. And structured religion can either choose to create space for that or not. But if it doesn't, I don't know. Like, I think for structured religion, it's commandeered time for centuries. It's oriented the world to its own time. And I personally feel time being unbound in a lot of ways. That's going to be a real struggle for something that has relied on time in certain ways. Structured religion has also necessitated an amount of certainty in order for there to continue to be like movement in that. I think it's going to need to create space for uncertainty. I think also Christianity in particular has made humans products. You are saved into something, right? Like, you then become a means of production for a system to continue to expand across the world. And so can we see humans as not something that are needed in order for something to endure? I don't know. This feels very like fuzzy to me, and I'm just kind of talking it out. So, like, do I believe this? Do I not believe this? I don't know. I feel like there's something true in there, but I'm not entirely sure the connection just yet. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, we'll just have to have you back on the show in a year and like see like what you've discovered, because
yes.
that I just feel like that relationship, like of all, like, whether it's organized religion, whether it's specifically it's like Christianity, which I suspect is easy for you and I to talk to, because that's a religion that both of us have practiced over time for most of our lives, and then economics, like the way that we, and specifically to distill that down, like the way that we communicate value to each other, and because value is so tied up in meaning, that like the way that we communicate meaning is a measure of value, and that measure of value as a state of economics becomes somehow intertwined with human. Well, I mean, to use an Episcopal term, because that's common to both of us, becomes intertwined. Value becomes intertwined with human dignity.
Yeah, I think you got the threads that I was trying to put out there. You're kind of weaving them together.
I don't know. Maybe that. I don't know. Like that. Like that's.
So TBD on this conversation.
This question of how we find meaning in the place of spirituality in a world that is so defined by money as the tangible expression of relationship, I think is just going to linger with me for some time because we all have to eat.
Yeah, I think I am kind of also, I had to do a lot of work around the relationship between spirituality and money when I was starting my business. Because there was a part of me that was just like, this is wrong. You know, like spirituality is something that belongs to people. Yeah, like it feels so, maybe it's just because like that's how it feels for me, but it feels so tender. It feels so I don't know, like it is something that has been and continues to be abused. Like spiritual authority is something that has caused a lot of harm. And so how do I provide spiritual support in a way that is ethical and is compassionate and is grounded, and that like also recognizes that I'm doing something really unique, and I have like very particular gifts that like I do deserve to be compensated for. And so there's this a question of like maybe the question is of like mutual worthiness, right? Like your spirituality is like worthy of being held in a certain way, and like my spiritual gifts are worthy of being matched in a certain way. And so my hope is that like as the folks that I work with, as our relationship unfolds, then they're empowered to then provide spiritual support in transformed ways as well. And so I think this is like the place that requires the most trust for me. And it's still a question of like, what is ethical spiritual support in a like late stage capitalist world that our structured religion has contributed to the formation of, and thus like folks no longer feel like they can trust spiritual spaces and institutions. And so then what does that mean for the work that those of us who are engaging in spiritual work in new ways, in ways that are really trying to be like radical and disruptive? Where do we fit into all of that? And I think over time, I think that Spirit School will actually have some of those answers. But right now it's still in the unfolding, so I don't have too much to say yet.
I can't wait to see what that becomes. How Spirit School, to call back one of the words that you used very early on in our conversation, what the container of learning that Spirit School is allows to germinate from the stakeholders, the beautiful souls and inspirations that you haven't even met yet.
Okay.
I can't wait.
Yeah. Me too.
I have one final question for you.
All right.
What do you want the world to look like when you're done with it?
I was scrolling on Instagram the other day, and I like stumbled on this artist. I couldn't even tell you the name of the person, but they had these kind of like dystopian, maybe utopian, who knows, photography that is kind of like, is very surreal. but it was photography. But
Yeah.
I couldn't tell like what was real or what wasn't. But essentially, it was kind of this like I think it was like LA landscapes, but they were just like covered in overgrowth, and so there was this like real sense of like land reclaiming, like the harms that like humans have caused. So I have that image, and at least for me, like there's still humans in that picture. There weren't humans in the picture, but I think about like what would it look like for us to really I don't know. I hope the world is like slowly starting to allow for like a regrowth. And that's like, that feels like a really big dream, just because it would require like so many people to let go. And it would require a lot of people to face that grief. And I don't know if we're quite ready as a collective to experience like mass grief. I think we were handed opportunities for that in the last few years. And there are like glimpses of the potential for that. I think I'll like wrap it up by saying that like, I think grief is really generative. I think grief is the place that like new dreams and imaginations can grow out of. Like new ways of loving grow out of that grief, just to bring it back full circle. And so I hope for a world that is maybe in the process of like that deep grief. Yeah, maybe I'll say that.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It was a really special conversation. I appreciate it.
My thanks to Eréndira Jiménez Esquinca. You can check out her website at erendirajimenez.com. You can check out Spirit School at spiritschool.us. And you can listen to her podcast, I Don't Know, everywhere you listen to podcasts. You can follow her and Spirit School on all social media platforms at the links in the episode description. Thank you so much for tuning in to Uncommon Good with Polly Reese. This program is produced in Southwest Philadelphia on the unceded land of the Lenni Lenape tribe and the Black Bottom community. If you enjoyed listening to the show, please support us by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment and subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help people find us. Uncommon Good is also available on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Uncommon Good Pod. Follow us there for closed captioned video content and more goodies. We love questions and feedback. You can send us a DM on social media or an email at uncommongoodpod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, wishing you every uncommon good, to do your uncommon good, to be the uncommon good.